Hi, how are you?
I'm great, Tom. How are you?
I'm not bad. I wanted to call you Canadian actor Bowen Yang.
You technically could, Canadian American actor, dual
Yeah.
citizen actor.
I get a lot of people telling me, because ever since you blew up on SNL, a lot of people coming up to me and being like, did you know he's Canadian?
I'm hardly the first Canadian person on the show.
No, I think you're the first.
Well, yeah, we'll go with that. First Asian Canadian, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe not.
in fact, I talked to Simu Liu about that a couple of weeks ago, and I'll ask you about that later. But let's talk about the movie. Let's talk about the movie.
Okay, sure, sure,
I
sure.
really loved it first.
Thank you.
So I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about Fire Island and why it's a good place for a rom com.
It's a great place for a rom-com because it is maybe set against an ethos of debauchery that like it is this place that is maybe known for the hedonistic pleasures of being a queer person that don't define the queer experience, but are maybe a part of it, maybe something that is um, appealing about being queer. I feel like setting a rom com there is just the perfect tension in terms of it being a place where you wouldn't expect to necessarily find romance in spite of set against all of the carnal pleasures of being there in the first place.
Yeah, because it's an interesting film. In addition to like looking, I mean, this is the CBC, so I'm going to overthink it a little bit.
Yeah,
In addition to it being like, will they, won't they,
sure.
who's going to end up with who, it is sort of also one of the tensions at the heart of the film is whether romance is worth it at all.
Oh my gosh, totally, totally. If even after you've internalized so much rejection or having romance be put out of reach for you for all your whole life, whether or not it's possible.
I think one of the other parts of the movie that I love is it's not just an investigation of romance; it's also an investigation of friendship.
Yes,
And I know that Joel Kim Booster, who wrote the film, you guys are buddies in real life, right?
we are. We've been very close friends for a long time.
How did you meet?
We met, oh gosh, it's such a winding story with so many twists, but he and I were first put in the same Facebook chat after a comedian who had both done a show with us, separate shows with us, one with Joel in Chicago and one with me in New York. But he met both of us and said, you have to meet Bowen Yang or you have to meet Joel Kim Booster. He's also gay and Asian and funny. And so, of course, we rolled our eyes and said, it's that begrudging thing of like having your aunt like set you up on a date or something, right? Like having someone like pair you together with someone that you don't know and have no familiarity with. And it ended up being sort of fortuitous because this person was right. We did end up liking each other once we met about a year later. But Joel had moved to the city, had moved to New York, avoided me maybe for the better part of a year until I booked him on a show that I was doing, a comedy show, and then I met him in the dressing room. Just to say hello, but I saw like a star shower happen behind him. Like I was like, I mean, I know this person's going to be important to me for the rest of my life, and now we're in this friggin' movie together.
And did I hear some kind of story that, and I could be wrong about this. So like the movie is also I mean, I'm saying a lot of things that the movie is. The movie is also sort of Pride and Prejudice.
Yep.
And did I hear some story about you and Joel on a boat to Fire Island when someone was reading Pride and Prejudice? Am I right about that?
Oh gosh, see, at this point, the story is so apocryphal that it could have been on a boat, it could have been by the beach, it could have been by the pool. I think it was by the pool, but it was our first trip to the island together. I had gone there once before, but I went back with Joel back when we were barely able to afford going, back when we stayed in a house that was like 14 people to a 3 bedroom place. Something that's pretty reflected in the movie, I think, are those early trips together. But he brought this tattered green paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice with him and turned to me when we were reading and said, wouldn't it be so funny if I wrote a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice that took place here and that was all gay men? And I went, yeah, sure. That is really pretty ingenious. I was projecting my work ethic onto him and being like, you'll never write that because I would never have the time to write that. And I'm lazy. So good luck. And then years later, sure enough, a draft of it showed up in my inbox, and I was like, "Oh, the man did the thing. He went through with it. The threat that he made. He calls it a threat."
And it's so beautiful because I would only know you from comedy. I mean, I would mainly know you from Saturday Night Live, and I would know
Uh,
you a little bit from your podcast, but I would mainly know you through the lens of comedy. So I was wondering, acting wise,
yeah,
like in this movie, you have to also be a leading man. I mean, yeah, you have these sort of gorgeous fellas around you, but there's love, there's tension, you feel quite torn at times. How was accessing that in this job?
Pretty different. It was just such a wild modality shift from what I'm used to. And even in the scripted on camera stuff I've done outside of SNL, it's still mostly driven by the comedy, by the jokes, by the performances that you give on set. And if you make like a crew person laugh, then you know you've done a good job, right?
Yeah.
But for something like this, it was more about tracking this character's journey through this really tenuous time in his life in this very stimulating place that had to be very intentionally rendered through the direction, through Andrew On, through Joel's writing. But for me, at least on a performance level, like I was going home every day being like, I don't know if I did that, if I did well, because I'm not sure how people are, because I won't know how people are going to respond to this until it comes out.
Is it also a thing where you do comedy, you can detach a little bit? I'm not an actor, so I don't know. Like you can detach and just deliver lines, but drama, don't you have to go somewhere kind of personal in you?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I thought it was the other way around, but with comedy, I think you're taking something internal and externalizing it, right? You're like sharing a point of view, or you're, sharing a thought. I think with drama, you kind of have to be stimulated by the outside world and then synthesize that within. You have to take something from the outside and put it in you. And that's a pretty painful process sometimes, to hold on to something that's painful, maybe.
I'm not fully sure I understand. Can you give me an example in this as it relates to the film?
As it relates to the film, like I was, like you said, like around a bunch of gorgeous men, and my character is insecure. And so I had to sort of, try to synthesize that feeling a certain way. And it's not going full method or anything, but I had to sort of go home, feel a little insecure about myself as I related to like all these other actors and castmates, and think, well, how would the character process this? And how am I able to like bottle that up so I can like open up the bottle when I'm called to do it in a couple days for this emotional scene? Like I had to really be stimulated by something that was happening around me and then capturing it and keeping it, storing it in my own internal hard drive. Whereas with comedy, you kind of take something that you have kind of held on to for a long time and you put it out into the world. It's a reversal of that directionality.
Oh, that's so interesting. I also like, you can also see like the love that you and Joel had in some of the send-ups in this movie. So like, just to give some context, like Fire Island is, I mean, the actual Fire Island is, yeah, sure, it's like, it's a legendary gay destination. It can be a legendary gay destination for white, rich, kind of buff dudes. And in this movie, I should say, I mean, your characters and your character and your friends don't necessarily fit into those boxes. Some of my favorite moments are, say, like when someone walks into the mansion and the rich gay buff dude is there, and every time he sees you, no matter how many times he sees you.
Can I help you? He says, can I help you?
Can I help you? Yeah, can I help you? Like, was there a joy in sending some of those microaggressions up?
Totally. I mean, it's the one thing that like, it's the one lever of power that like we have that maybe they don't now, which is that we get to make a movie about them, And so of course, like Joel's gonna like kind of skewer that a little bit, but it is out of love, like you say. Like I do genuinely love going, and I guess people do have their preconceived notions about what that place is and who it's for, and the patronage of the place, and how it's not necessarily for people who look like me. But I've always been able to carve out a space where I feel like I belong there with the people I'm around. And I feel like that's hopefully the lesson in the movie, or not the lesson, but like the takeaway, that like, if you're around the right chosen family, you can really venture off into any space and feel comfortable or feel somewhat liberated.
Yeah, if you have the people you love behind you and the people you love around you,
Yeah, exactly. And so, but the send-ups of that kind of thing are all done out of like a lived in experience, but also like a love for those people. Like, and the people who play those villainous white muscular gay people are like the nicest, sweetest people in the world. And I can't stress that enough, because I feel like my fear is that people will just like villainize them to such an extent that they think that they're like that in real life, and they just aren't.
I know we were like joking around about you being Canadian, whether I can introduce you as Canadian, but you are like, you spent some years and some key years in Brossard, right? Like just outside of
Years in
Montreal.
Brassard. Oh, you're saying it the French way, because I think
Brossard.
people say Brossard, but then I was so used to in school speaking French, going Brossard, and that was that was like a pretty important stretch of time in my life that has really stayed with me.
Like, what years were they?
That was 91 to 99.
So like what, 4 to
Oh, that was like 1 to 8.
1 to 8.
1 to 9 or something like that. And it was like my earliest like way of socializing. It was my way of like it was like going to public school and just understanding that like humor was this tool and this defense mechanism, but it was a way to get people to like you and ingratiate yourself upon people. But yeah, I mean, I've gone back a couple times, and I do feel this like connection to it, as silly as that sounds. But,
what jokes are you making in public school in Quebec to ingratiate yourself to people?
I mean, it was just in Quebec. It was just about like going to Juste pour rire, like just for laughs, like in the summer, coming back and just like basically like doing what the street performers do, or just like cracking jokes, cracking wise. And it was like, I just remember it being a very funny. I just remember people at school everyone being very funny. And so you had to sort of match their frequency and their level and sort of give it right back. So that I remember when I moved to the US, it was just like, oh, I'm the funny one. I thought everyone was supposed to be funny.
Do you think that the Juste pour rire, like just for laughs, is that in you somewhere now?
I think so. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, those were some of my earliest comedy memories, was like going downtown. Like my parents and I would go to dim sum or something in Chinatown in Montreal, but then we would walk around and just like watch the free performances that would happen at the festivals, or watch the street performers. And I remember just being like, that seems so fun, and probably in some capacity has like motivated this desire to like do that.
And now it's sort of coming back. Like some of my favorite SNL moments since you've been on the show have been moments where I go, I wonder if he wrote that. Like I wonder these small Canadian moments. Like I wanted to mention one. So in 2020, you did this sketch on SNL called Bonjour Hi.
Bonjour Hi, yes.
With Kate McKinnon. It's a Quebecois morning talk show with Drake Watch. It is so unbelievably specific. The question I had about it was like, given that Lorne Michaels is Canadian, is that just something where you pitch that and he's Canadian, so he goes like, yeah, of course, no problem?
Well, no, because I think Lorne is very sensitive to people pandering to his Canadianness. And so I think I had to build up enough of a familiarity with him, or, he had to be familiar with me being Canadian. I think I had to tell him like 20 different times, hey, I'm from Canada, for him to be like, oh, he's from Canada, so he can write something like this. And that was also co-written with Sudie Green and then another Asian Canadian writer, Celeste Diem. And they were able to just bring so much specificity to that. That's one of my favorite sketches I've ever done. It's
so Canadian, man. Like
well, like I remember, like even like speaking of public school, like my teachers in public school. I mean, we were third graders in year 3, like just people shouting at us, but like telling us to shut the hell up. And it was just something that I had to like fold into the sketch somehow.
Another sketch I wanted to ask you about before we go back to the movie was, so I mentioned to you, I talked to Simu Liu a couple of weeks ago. He's been on the show and we had a grand old yak, and I asked him how the SNL experience was for him, because he hosted last season, right? Yeah.
Last season.
Yeah.
No, this past season.
This past season. And he said it was great. And he said, I had a great time doing that sketch with Bowen, like that, and we talked a little bit about the sketch. So it's this one where you guys both keep getting these weird honors for being the first Asian so-and-so, like right. The first Asian guy on SNL to do a Cher impression. Can you talk to me a little bit about making that sketch with Simu?
Yeah, I mean, that was another sketch that I wrote with Celeste Diem, and I think we were both kind of commiserating about how these titles or these quote unquote like accolades have this tension between being like important and like honorable and deserving honor, but also probably a little too granular sometimes, right? That like there is this, that we are in this interesting moment in media where Asian people are being are named as important for being groundbreaking in their fields, which they are, but then the way that that is being sort of rewarded is sometimes really grandiose. And so it's kind of a way to like, there was a way to infuse that into like this relationship between me and Simu, where we probably are categorized the same way in people's minds sometimes as Asian actors, Asian people in entertainment. And so what might we have in common despite the things that we don't have in common? And like I don't think I will ever be a Marvel superhero. And so I don't know how to relate to someone like Simu, but I can relate to him in terms of being someone who has been on an Asian sitcom and has auditioned for like the delivery person, in various movies before he made his big break. And like we were able to just sort of build on that. And it was beautifully collaborative. He was I watched it back the other day because someone sent it to me and they were like, it's the end of AAPI Heritage Month in America and it's about to be Pride. So like, this is the perfect bridge between those two things. And Seema was just so good in that.
And we've been talking about this a little bit on the show recently. So the tension is between, the honor of being the first and the granular nature of what you're the first of. Yeah. Is there also a tension between the honor of being the first and a critique that you are the first? Like it's taken this long to be the first of,
Maybe. I think that anytime there is this critique of it's taken this long for this to have happened, I think it doesn't ignore the larger picture, but I think it doesn't quite acknowledge the thing that I think is required, which is like some developmental pathway to ensure that an Asian person doing whatever thing is an inevitability, that you make sure that like you build out enough stuff for the outcome of an Asian person working in entertainment, let's say, to be a sure thing. Because there are all those cliches, those professional tropes of what an Asian person and an immigrant might do, yeah. And what fields they end up in. But I feel like that's just more of a function of how like you haven't built out like a curriculum, let's say, or like a programming thing in terms of developing someone into becoming a Marvel superhero in the end. Like it's not completely inevitable that an Asian person who wants to become a Marvel superhero will become a Marvel superhero. Unless you're Simu and you tweet about it and then you get an audition.
No, but I understand. I understand that you mean you need to acknowledge the long road and the path and the people who offer opportunities and the training to get to these moments.
Exactly.
Well, let me. Well, two things, and I have 2 minutes left with you, so I think I can get them both in. We're going to talk to Margaret Cho after you. I think in about maybe an hour or so. She co-stars in this movie Fire Island with you. She plays a mother figure to your character and his friends. I mean, Margaret broke down a lot of doors when it comes to, especially when it comes to Asian visibility on screen. How meaningful was it for you to work with her?
It was so meaningful. She's broken down, I think, just about every door. I mean, at some point, every single person on this cast pulled her aside and was like, you just need to know how much you mean to me. Like, I wouldn't be here without you. She was this bisexual Korean woman standing on stage in front of thousands of people at Carnegie Hall, like one of the most hallowed venues in the world, making people erupt in laughter. Like, there's such a power to that image that, like, it just changes your parameters. If you grow up an Asian kid and go, well, I don't think I can, or, you grow up an Asian kid and your parents tell you, well, there's so much uncertainty in entertainment, you shouldn't do that. Or there aren't people who have been successful in that who you can model yourself after. But then Margaret shows up and then your whole world changes. So this movie would not have happened without her. And just in a sort of cosmic historical sense, like you can draw a straight line from her performing stand-up, being in a sitcom with Asian leads, to this movie with Asian leads that stars her as well. It's full circle.
Well, let me wrap like this. I mean, you've been really open about your journey. I mean, you're growing up in Quebec. I mean, everything from those days to your parents sending you to conversion therapy as a teenager, which again wasn't that long ago. I mean, you're still young now, and now you're starring in this very beautiful and kind of mainstream rom-com about gay people finding love and the nuances of romance and all that stuff. Like, what would this film have meant to you when you were a kid?
It would have blown my mind. I think I would have probably had something to check my own emotions against. If I felt the rejection that Howie feels, then I make my character Howie feels. Or if I felt like my friendships were kind of frayed at the edges because of whatever conflict, that I'd be able to watch this movie and go, oh no, there's a way back. There's a way back to like making sure that the love is there and that we all are on the same page and that we all can tell each other that we want the best for each other. I hope this gives some sort of blueprint for people who just want to live out their lives in a better way, where they get to, I don't know, just be more complete people.
Bowen, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, Tom. This was so nice. I really enjoyed this.
I really enjoyed this too. Bowen Yang is a Canadian actor who stars in the new film Fire Island. You can watch it now on Disney Plus.